Okay. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining Draftbit's weekly live stream. I'm Nick with Draftbit. Today is Friday, May 28th, and today I'm super excited to be joined by Reid Lappin, the CEO of Vokal. So, Reid, can you just maybe give our folks a quick introduction to who you are, what Vokal is, and kind of what you guys are about?
Yeah, great. First and foremost, thanks for having me, Nick. I'm excited to get into this today. And yeah, some background on myself and Vokal. Business has been around about 10 years. We've made a pivot in the last couple of years to really focus on helping mid-market incumbent brands, so non-digital natives, really play more of a growth-oriented sport when it comes to digital. I think that the space is moving so quickly. I read a statistic the other day that $426 million were put into startups a day in 2020. And so for these businesses that have been around for a long time, digital is not necessarily foreign to them, but understanding who their competition is has changed. Consumer user behavior expectations have evolved tremendously, and these organizations struggle to get the right talent. They struggle to understand playbooks that high growth digital companies scale on. So we predominantly hire out of high growth startups and focus on partnering with companies to accelerate their growth through growth strategies and execution. So that's a high level on Vokal, and we'll get into a little bit more detail and context on the organization throughout the conversation.
That's awesome. So Vokal, sort of self-stated, are leaders in the digital economy. Now, first, for those of us like me who don't really know what the digital economy means, can you kind of like define or explain like what you mean when you say the digital economy?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, digital economy is one of those words like digital transformation, right? It means everything and it means nothing. So,
Totally.
with these terms, it's a really a matter of like what your perspective is on it. And for us, I think there's a few things. One, there's obviously just so much growth in how we as users are adopting different platforms and technologies. There's there's so much money being put into innovation and growing these businesses, right? So I think when we look at the digital economy, I kind of view it as like an end user economy. If I were to look at like the eras of technology going back over the last 20 years, I think a lot of it was dominated by CIOs, and then it kind of moved into CEOs owning more of a strategy and how these companies are going to evolve in digital. And now I think the end users really, control most of the power. There's so many options on where, how, and what you can receive in terms of digital products and services. And it's never been easier to launch a business in digital. So I think when we look at all of that, it just is it's where business is being done. And take a year of COVID, and you had an entire world that truly was operating from a digital first perspective and getting any day-to-day task complete. So when I look at the digital economy, just put it in really simple terms, it really is it really is truly a digital world. I mean, everything we do, everything we tie to has some digital component to it. And that's only going to change and grow, both with just the speed and rate of rise at which technology can change. And when we look at Generation Z, you have an entire generation that is only really willing to take on experiences that are digital. So I think we're going to see a lot more significant change in the coming decade, if you will.
It's super interesting. You mentioned COVID, and the pandemic. Like, what have been the biggest differences you've seen in the last year and a half compared to how the world was kind of before this all started?
Yeah, I think there's three things from at least Vokal's perspective that we saw. One were companies that weren't ramped up and investing in digital had to move very, very quickly. So we saw a lot of kind of stagnant brands that were pretty comfortable with where they stood, really having to figure out not only their investment strategy, but just start to place bets and move really quickly. So we saw a lot more folks start to get a lot more active in terms of how they were going to compete and look at growing their business through digital. The second was you saw a lot of industries boom in COVID, and you saw others that struggled. And I think either way, the organizations that boomed were able to take advantage of doubling down on their investments in digital and really trying to get ahead of competition and get ahead of their industries. And the ones that were struggling, could not deny the fact that they still had to be putting investments into growth strategies for digital, and they had to be a lot more efficient about it. So I think from my perspective, particularly with companies in the latter spot, is I think is a benefit, right? I think companies that were if I can't recall the number, but there's so much money that goes into corporate waste when it comes to innovation and digital. So companies had to buckle down and get a lot more efficient and really ask themselves what they were investing in and what the intentions were. And to ask themselves, are we playing the right sport? Are we doing the right thing? So those are definitely a few trends. And then the last is like I mentioned, consumer expectations, whether it's in B2B, B2C, B2B2C, we are trained by Apple, Peloton, Uber. So therefore, any technology, any interface that we come across, we have certain expectations on what those interfaces will do for us, how they'll behave, how they'll transform with me the more I use the product. So I think companies had to, in every industry and in every sense, really think about a consumerized experience and what does that look like and how do you get there. Nick, I lost you. I don't know if you can hear me. Not yet. Try the settings here.
Now.
Now you're good.
Yeah. All right. AirPods are going in now. I apologize.
All good.
Okay. So you kind of mentioned at the top, like, in some senses, with the digital economy, it's never been easier to digitize, right? The tools and just the things that are at folks' fingertips. So for these brands that you're working with, that often means that they have brand new challengers that they never expected to be challengers before. But it also means that it's easier for them to spin up. If they're really stagnant, it's never been easier for them to stand up a digital challenger brand or a digital product. So if you could maybe tell us a little bit about, like, what do you see happening in this world? How do you see like large, sort of, like, for lack of a better term, like Luddite companies sort of trying to fend off new challengers? And how do you see traditional industries that haven't been very technology focused, how do you see them being challenged by new incumbents who are very fast?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a few things to unpack there. Yeah, it's good. I think, so when we think about technology today, there's just so many different tools and platforms that you can use that allow you to get feedback loops, test value propositions, get real quantitative insights on whether there's demand for the product, whether acquisition is working in a capital efficient way, how you can think about engagement, re-engagement, retention, kind of all the pillars of metrics that go into digital and how those scale at different parts of a product lifecycle, a digital platform product service lifecycle. And so with these organizations, whether they're doing it well or not, I think the ones that are doing it well have investments in innovation, but are using a very gated innovation process. So I think before, if I were to go back 5 years ago, someone in the organization would say, hey, I have a good idea. We should invest here. There's demand in this market. There's lookalike products like this. And these organizations would treat them very much like projects, right? How much is it going to cost? What's the timeline? And they would get into building very quickly. Of course, there was aspects of quant and qual research, but I think the speed to getting into writing software was pretty immediate. And I had someone kind of that I was talking with at University of Chicago, someone very intelligent that didn't understand software, as I was explaining to them the software digital product space. Like, oh, so once you build a product, it's like having a baby. You have to feed it, you've got to clothe it, you've got to send it to school, and it just gets more and more expensive and time consuming over time. Like I've not heard that analogy, but yes, absolutely. Right. So I think, particularly in the early innovation stage, the the more you can stay out of writing custom code to getting quant feedback loops, to give yourself the confidence that your investment thesis is strong. You are going to end up building something. You are going to end up scaling. You'll be using, cloud software like AWS. You may, get into writing native apps. You may be using React Native, React, what have you, when you go to look to scale the product. But I think that there's a lot of opportunities to stay out of software and get traction, to better support the investment thesis and go to market. When I think about products, you're really thinking and shipping bets and experiments, right? So in our culture, we of course ship features, but we know that different parts of the features and journeys and aspects of what we ship aren't going to be right. We're not going to see all, success in everything that we invest in and do. And so I think having the expectations set in these large companies within their culture is a challenge for them. And even when those expectations are set, you ask yourself, do I have the right people that have done this work before, or am I investing in someone that is doing it for the first time, which is very common in these companies. Like, many of these folks, even though they're great brands, these individuals have done the same job for such a period of time, and they've done a great job. That's why these are great brands. They're great businesses. But they are oftentimes learning on the job when it comes to things like innovation or really playing in an aggressive way in digital product and marketing. And so then I think the other piece is a lack of knowledge on the tools you can use, whether that is like no code, low code tools. A big trend we're seeing is in more modern marketing product tech stacks. And so I think really kind of innovation, really staying out of code, getting the right investment thesis, kind of speed to market. Think about that you're shipping experiments, being able to kind of throttle forward and backwards on those, which then really requires the right set of tools to be able to A/B test, to be able to, leverage platforms like Amplitude to really look at kind of behavior analysis and behavior automations. And then I think in terms of, and I know this is throwing a lot out there, really taking more of a growth hacking mentality than a like a marketing and just shipping a product mentality, right? And so it's a very uncomfortable even term maybe to say inside of some of these organizations. We're going to be growth hacking, we're going to be failing, we're going to be shipping experiments. But the ones that can embrace it, see just so much faster traction, so much more payback on the money they've put in, and or they're able to kill things much faster than maybe they had in the past. These companies have a lot of money, so it's not always just about the money. It's about the distraction, and it's about knowing whether you have something valuable and are you going to be overspending on growth. An example I saw last night. I was sitting watching TV with my wife and kids, and a commercial came on for Fitbit Luxe, and it was a good looking product. It looked luxurious. It looked like that. And I remember I worked with a client, I won't mention the name, that basically had this product probably 6 years ago. It was a piece of jewelry wearable that looked really good, was aimed at females. It basically looked like Fitbit Luxe. The organization was in a different space, and kind of made this bet, but they put way too much money into it early on and killed it after a year and a half because they didn't get immediate commercial success. So I think knowing how you scale go to market is, when you initially get to market, you're almost just trying to find insights versus like sales. And that's a very different mentality for companies that are sales-led organizations that just haven't been around high growth startups or early stage ideas that they've made successes.
That's super fascinating. You can hear me, by the way. I futzed with my AirPods while you. Okay, good.
I gotcha.
That's super fascinating. So let's say I'm like an executive at a company who's maybe been burned by technology bets in the past, and even as recent as like 3-5 years ago, where maybe the explosion of these no code, low code tools wasn't as, maybe it was beginning, but it wasn't as prevalent. Like, what would you say to me to convince me that, hey, there's a different way now? Your business case doesn't need to be as buttoned up. You don't have to take as big a risks. You don't have to corral as many stakeholders and as many resources to get this thing across the finish line. You can do this in sort of a lean, efficient, rapid way. Like, how do you convince someone that there's a different way now?
Yeah, it's interesting. So if you just kind of break down the personas, right? You have businesses that weren't founded in digital and technology. You have a board of directors that are far removed from what's happening in the world, whether that be in social media or in digital product. You have CEOs and executives that are total badasses. That he or she, have climbed the ladder, raised the ranks, know how to operate, a great P&L and navigate growth for the core business, that are also pretty far, for the most part, pretty far removed from, they've never done the digital growth work themselves, yet they are at the helm in a digital economy, leading the investment strategies and kind of blessing those. Then you have the doers, right? The folks that are responsible for carrying those out. They too often haven't been in truly a high growth situation. They haven't been a part of a startup. They weren't a part of any digital venture rounds or exits. And so therein lies a lot of risk at just that whole infrastructure, right? And I think your options are to then maybe use outside partners. Many of these companies, I think, look at using the Accentures, McKinseys of the world, which I think the world of. They're great businesses. They definitely have a lot of value that they drive. But when you think about digital, and that, we started with like digital economy being everything and nothing and digital transformation being the same. I think these companies make digital transformation just feel like a really big funnel. Like, it's just like, you do a 6-week $1 million diagnostic on the whole business. It's a 3 to 5 year roadmap. And when I'm in conversations with CEOs, I really kind of say, like, at least with Vokal's approach, like, we kind of want to start with like a very narrow funnel. Like, we want to take like an initial mission, initial pilot. We want to look at what your data is telling us, understand your business goals, and let me find an initial metric to move, right? So if these companies all have existing plays in innovation, they have an existing portfolio of digital products, services, and tools. And when you can demonstrate that you can move quickly, that you can stand things up quickly, and you can move metrics or get to insights faster than what they've seen, you start to see a lot more confidence, right? So when I talk to my team, I always say, we're not operating this business for revenue, right? Now, I wouldn't say that to my head of finance. So there's kind of front of house, back of house, but I really talk to my teams that are on the delivery side. This is you managing a investment strategy and investment dollars for their growth in digital. So as a wealth advisor would do for a client, right? My goal is to manage your investments and grow them and give you return. Otherwise, why would you give me your money? And so for us, really being able to quickly calibrate ROI, really being clear on what metrics we're going after, and having, very tight buttoned up strategies to go move those, versus making the strategy and the investment play larger than it needs to be, right? And each case, different circumstances, right? When you're building software, it gets more expensive, but I think growth levers in doing like acquisition work, like engagement testing, these can be smaller investments, smaller bets. And when you find one that works, you can have a really big payback. So I think when you can get to that moment of inflection with an executive team, that's a big piece. And then it's also helping them understand that partnering with folks like Vokal will allow you to grow your culture this direction. We want to really integrate as a partner so that we can help you build playbooks that can scale. And the work isn't rocket science or magic, but we want to show your team how to be able to get good at this work and operating these tools as well. So I think that's kind of the value prop that we really look to deliver into companies is really speed to ROI, really clear data and insights on what that ROI and what the mission is, and then ensuring that we're helping you, build your own playbooks and build muscles or exercise muscles that will help you become more competitive in the speed of the digital revolution.
That's really fascinating. We got a really good question in the chat, and I feel like this is a nice segue to ask this one. So you mentioned the folks that you are working with inside of these organizations, the ones that you really want to show the path forward. who, like, what types of roles are they? What types of people
Yeah.
are they that are really like kind of driving this digital innovation forward?
It's interesting. So I think a lot of it sat in technology up until the last couple of years. We've certainly seen some organizations obviously adopt digital product orgs. It's relative on to like, can they recruit the right kind of talent? It's tough for all of us to recruit. And then more and more I'm seeing it shift into marketing as well. But I think the interesting thing is, how do they break down the silos? When I think about product, it really is a matter of like data, product strategy, and marketing. Like, those need to be like all working in harmony together, and it's way easier said than done. But yeah, I think that the role, where we're seeing it, if this is the question, if I'm understanding correctly, is you know uh, budgets live maybe in different areas, but like head of business units, so GMs of a business unit, CMOs owning more digital, and then certainly product orgs if they have it. So if the question is on who's owning it in these organizations, what roles, but it really spans across. I mean, these companies, the digital is just, it's everywhere inside of these businesses. But in terms of ownership, it's definitely sitting at the top, and then sitting in those silos or pockets of these businesses.
Okay, super fascinating. And then maybe as like a addendum to that question, if the adoption or if the strategy is being driven by more or less like a top-down approach within these large organizations, who do you see, like what types of folks are the doers in the organization? Like, who might be learning new tools in the organization? Who might be in charge of implementation? Who might be like your folks in the business who are like your day-to-day work with, or the ones that you're really educating on the what and the how?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say, like, from what I see, is many of them have like the same titles that we would have at Vokal, or maybe that a pure play digital startup would have, like a Cameo, right? So they have product manager, they have design teams. They're layering in the right investments in terms of like position, role, title. I think how they play the sport is where I most often see teams missing, and just the sheer fact that that recruiting this really hybrid product growth expert is I mean, we know it at Vokal. We have to remain very disciplined and patient, and put a lot of energy into recruiting. Is just hard to do. So I think in terms of titles, like designers, I think, like, or if you think who should be adopting these, designers should really be adopting these low code, no code technologies, product managers that are non-technical. So anyone outside of engineering, but even engineering, right? Like our engineers at Vokal are all very comfortable with not only low code tools, but also like marketing tech stacks, right? Like being able to stand things up really quickly. And it's a bit obnoxious with how many tools and options and platforms that are out there. So I think it's important to, like, test and trial with different ones and know what's the best tool for the job. But those would be the roles that I see that are the doers. Yeah, folks in marketing, right? I think it's getting more comfortable with the amplitudes of the world, the segments of the world, Optimizely's, Iterable, Braze. So, and the marketing side, I think it's more of these like more modern marketing tech stacks. I think we're seeing more and more folks move away from, like, if I got Adobe Cloud, now I have Adobe Test and Target, now I have Adobe Experience Manager. Basically every box in that MarTech stack is Adobe. We're seeing that go not away, but we're seeing companies move away from that, or at least being more open. And then, obviously, like with things like Draftbit, with things like Webflow, Typeform, Flow.ai, definitely like design, product, and engineering as well. I think engineering kind of spans that both sides.
I was just going to ask, like, what tools are you most excited about in the space, and you kind of answered that. How do you think that these tools, whether or not they brand themselves as no code or low code, like there's engineers in an organization, right?
Yep.
And you've got engineers in your organization as well. And I think like a common misconception is that like no code or low code is coming to take the jobs of engineers.
Yeah.
I hear it all the time. I personally disagree with that sentiment, but I'm curious to hear your perspective on like what are these quote unquote no code, low code tools? What are they doing for the product and engineering organization, or how do you see that shifting the dynamics of the type of talent that you need in an organization?
Yep, it's a great question because Vokal came from more of like a feature factory model, go back like 5 years ago, into more of like a product led growth model from a consulting perspective. So, I lived through managing that change management inside our own business, and I'll give our whole team a ton of credit, our engineering group a ton of credit for kind of leaning into this, right? And I think like one from a mentality shift, I think I'm seeing engineers still stay very strong in technical architecture and really understanding the product development. But in our group, they've also kind of expanded their horizons from that to really thinking more about success holistically in the product is frankly like a user completing the behaviors we want them to complete, right? So when I think about a product, like there's doing a bunch of work to getting a user here, and then getting them back here, and then there's work that is getting the user to do the behaviors we want them to do when they get there. And each user is different, each cohort's different, right? And so I think being kind of taking more of that critical mindset in like a behavior driven development environment, right? So we at Vokal have shifted from like a test driven development, if you're kind of getting more into the technical side, to behavior driven development, like really getting our whole team centered that success is on the behavior completion, the task completion, not just like did the feature work, green light, red light, right? So I think it's a mentality on knowing that what product and behavior metrics are important, what success really looks like, what those benchmarks are, and that has to be true cross-functionally, right? And I think that product managers, that's a really important role for them to have, the cross-functional teams really centered on what those benchmarks are based on where you're at in the life cycle. And then two, from low code to writing custom web apps or whatever it might be, it's knowing where you're at in the product lifecycle, and do we have the right data that tells us like that we're building and operating on the right thing, right? So it definitely, you're going to see a mass adoption of low code tools, but you're still going to need engineers for integrations, for writing custom front ends, for dealing with the data. The data is huge, right? Like how you manage the data, how do you achieve machine learning, how do you achieve personalization? Yes, like AWS has so many great out of the box things, but there's all this architecture and orchestration that is so important. So engineers, I think, have a even more critical role going forward, because it's a much wider scope, which is, I think, just tremendously exciting for them. But it's really kind of knowing your situation and knowing, what the business goals are. The data and the metrics never lie, so long as they're tracked and presented the right way. And, there's a lot more dynamic decision making in terms of what tool to use when, how we want the product to scale. Frankly, knowing that when you're shipping experiments, that like the quality of your code, if you're writing something custom, maybe isn't as important if we know that we're going to be testing a bunch of stuff and pivoting. So I think there's just kind of like I don't want to say like a mindset shift. It's definitely been an evolution that just is, it's how the tech has given us these optionalities, right? And so and great digital startups have shown us what you can do with it, right? I mean, you look at these companies that are dominating the stock market, that are dominating the world. So I think all of that has just kind of evolved us to think about what success in the digital channels really look like and how you get there.
Yeah, it's all super exciting, and very interesting insights. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot of questions about sort of like market and where what where the future is headed and things like that. And I want to get to those. But if we could just for a moment shift gears, Reid, I kind of want to talk more nitty gritty, like the title of this live stream is launching and validating no code products. So
yep.
If you wouldn't mind kind of giving us, and again, your context is you're launching digital products or digital experiments, which could become digital products for large organizations, usually incumbent organizations, tech organizations that are typically not as tech savvy. Could you just walk us through like what the life cycle of a project looks like? Like, how do you think about launching digital experiments and where no code, low code tools fit in, and like literally like the nuts and bolts tactical stuff of how you do it? Like, how does a professional do it?
Yeah, so I guess maybe the best way to do this is just kind of like walk through some examples, because it's so dynamic just depending on like what the circumstances. So we'll just walk through some playbooks. Maybe that's the best way to look at it. So ideas are cheap, right? There's a lot of great ideas out there. And so, let's say we're sitting on a concept that we have. We directionally think that, building a mobile app that has these features for this audience type makes sense. We believe that there's an addressable market. We believe that we have some core advantages to our business on why we have the right to win in that market. We have enough to kind of pursue a little bit further on this concept, right? And so one play that we run is using a tool, Webflow, that in this case for us allows us to build landing pages really quickly. And what we'll do is we'll build a handful of variants. So call it maybe 4 to 6 variants that really do a high fidelity design mock out of what we think this experience would be, the features, really focusing on the value proposition and telling that story. So like picture almost like Kickstarter style, and how we're telling a product story on a product that doesn't exist, but almost mocking it to the world as if it does exist. So once we build these out, which can be done in a matter of days or a week, we'll start to put a little bit of paid behind it. So we'll choose some channels. We'll, like make some bets on what audience segments we're trying to test with and go after. We'll basically just try to test demand on this. So like, can I go out in the wild and drive traffic to this concept based on this value proposition? And then there's different things from there you can do, like to get early access, give us your email. To learn more, give us your email. But even without email, it allows us to, in a really, granular way, get to understanding demand based on click-through rates, understand what were the high performing value propositions, and segmenting that audience type to say, do we believe this is the right?
I'm still with you. Can you
Did I lose you? Okay. Yeah, it looks like it. Some reason just went in the back screen, but so that would give us then some, quantifiable data points on if users are really into the concept. So being able to get to that point allows you to then, take those insights and then really say, do we believe that this is the right audience we can win with? Like with this value proposition, how do we move forward and test this further? So you can, then spin up, let's say if we're thinking a mobile app, let's use your platform, Nick. Let's talk about Draftbit, right? You can get a prototype up that is least code, that is, a much higher fidelity than maybe, Figma or like Adobe XD in terms of like functionality, what you can do with it. And I think that there's also like a parallel path of like being able to create, like Figma is a great tool, right? So to just, continue to design it out, create the concept, get some qualitative feedback on no code prototypes, but then increasing the fidelity to actually launch a product in a beta, to get users that gave us their email, or really based on that segment being able to recruit users that we want to actually use the product. And what I love about platforms like whether it be Draftbit or Webflow is that you can also hook up into great analytic tools, right? So you can start to get really good insights and plug in other tools that allow you to get to data points that you maybe couldn't get through a click through. And so I think there's a lot of back-end integrations that live within something like Draftbit as an example, that allow you to do some really cool things at early stages with the product, whether that's running tests or getting to better insights and data. And from there, I mean, just depending on what the circumstances, I think there are certain tools like Draftbit and Webflow that can scale depending on what your commercial go-to-market is. But by this point in time, you've either gotten enough information to kill it and to say, hey, we don't have enough data here, so we either need to go back and go through some more feedback loops, or we want to really commit. Now, what do we have? We've got some insights on channel performance, a little bit, not a lot, but we have some really strong insights and hypothesis formed on who our core and power users and audience segments are. So when I go to spend marketing dollars, I can be a lot more efficient in growth hacking early acquisition and activation. And I've understood a little bit more about what features and experiments I want to ship, and then holistically, I know what people care about within the value proposition, or at least I have a much stronger hypothesis on what people care about in the value proposition. So as we take all of that data, we're using that data to lean in and say, this is what's telling us that we believe we can go out in the wild, capture a power user, like introduce them to the value prop as quickly as possible when they get to the product. Now my questions start to become, can I engage, re-engage, and ultimately retain that user? So now you can start playing a really fun growth game with having a lot of science that's baked in with and really de-risking and removing some of the assumptions that I think people miss some of those steps.
That's really fascinating. So like what sorts of products or services is this applicable for? Can you run this playbook for physical products? Can you run this playbook for professional services? Can you run this playbook for technology products or digital products?
For sure.
Like, do you find that this works for all different things that you're trying to validate, or is it really more just on the technology side?
No, I mean, we've done it for a lot of durable good companies that want to get insights but pre-launch, right? And I think like it's an interesting playbook when you think about the value prop testing, because you're kind of pretending as if the product is for sure coming to market. And I think in today's world, I don't think you have to be as fearful of consumers. And you can always, let's say you're a big visible brand, you could always do this under a white label brand. So tuck it away so nobody knows it's tied back to you, so you don't get brand backlash. But I don't think like users today have, I mean, like I use this analogy, like Elon Musk can tell you that he can show you a beautiful picture of a Cybertruck and collect millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, tell you that one of the value props or features is a shatterproof window, and in demo one throw a baseball right through the window, and people are still paying for it, right? Like there's a little bit different, in terms of expectations of a user. And I think that some of these businesses that don't know these playbooks, and rightfully so, could have concerns around their brand and how people feel. Well, if Tesla can do this, you can too. So I think that one is just being aware that you can run this play. Two is just having the right strategy that you're comfortable with, but you could do it for services, at least on that one specifically, right? I think when you get into like services and hardware, it becomes a little bit harder to like mock out something like a door. And obviously, like that's what they are really good at. They're good at prototyping, manufacturing, understanding cost controls. Like that's where these companies are total badasses, right? And so I think if you can get better insights when you're doing something like a door, who really wants it in the market, why they wanted it. They talked a lot about sound, and soundproofing is big in COVID because people are working in their closets or their bathrooms or what, so I think like you can definitely pick out features of hardware products and value props of those and talk about them in different ways. And get a lot of really, really good feedback at scale. Like we all spend time on the internet. Therefore we all, like particularly in COVID, we were all sitting at home on our devices all day. So there's never been a better time to capture traffic in the wild and get those insights.
So what would you tell someone who's maybe understanding of launching products is even 5 years old? Like I think about building and launching products as, okay, I need to build an MVP first. and then I need to go take that MVP and I need to, you know, help user, you know, like understand how users are going to use. Like I need to build something. And what you're telling me is kind of counterintuitive to that. I mean, you literally said like in some senses we're pretending this thing exists before it actually does exist. Like what does that feel like to people whose like maybe assumptions about product building are being fundamentally challenged by this process that you're running?
I mean, it's mind blowing for people like this, right? I mean, I think that there's it's just so hard to keep up with what you can do. Because like what I just shared is not like an IP strategy to Vokal, right? Like it's you know, so I think it's just so hard to keep up that it is mind blowing when folks hear that. I didn't know you could do that. I've never done that, right? And so I think that's a hard thing inside of these businesses too. Is like we are really, you know, thoughtful and empathetic that when we go into these companies, it's not something you should be ashamed of if you didn't know it. It's not something you should be embarrassed about. We want people to be excited about it, and that's why we like to partner in such an integrated way. It's about making these organizations again build muscles they don't have and playbooks that can scale. So I think it is pretty mind blowing when folks see what you can do when you introduce them to just different approaches to doing it. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it for so long, and it's become like such a stigma inside of new product development as like, like it's there's so many good books on like how to get out of like just shipping features, or like thinking of a product as just building more, adding more, right? And so yeah, I think it to just answer your question, like how do they feel? I mean, they feel very good. It's way less money. It's easier to fail this way. It's better to fail this way. It's new, so they can adopt something new and they can run this play across a lot of different pieces. And so I think there's a lot of excitement, and yeah, I think when you can get that going inside of a company, you can really do well. Because what do these businesses have? They have strong existing cash flow. They have strong brand presence. They have an existing, like, pretty loyal and sturdy customer base. All the things that a startup doesn't have day one. So they have everything that a startup dreams of. Yet startups have everything that these companies dream of. So it's interesting to kind of have a bunch of buddies that are founders of super successful high growth companies, and a lot of friends that are CEOs of just incredible businesses that have done amazing things. Every company started as an innovator. How to maintain that is really difficult, even for companies that were early in .com that are like Cars.com to Carvana. It's just tough. It's not easy to understand like your best path forward on investing and what bets to place.
So up until now, we've been talking a lot about large enterprises, the folks who have existing brand presence, customers, cash flow, the resources to basically run these experiments. And we kind of talked about like these aren't like $10 million tech projects. These are you can place smaller bets or you can spread out your bets, but at the end of the day, you do need to put, sounds like, maybe some money behind like ads and things like that to like run some traffic, some volume through your experiments.
Yep.
Let's say that you, Reid, or me, Nick, like let's say we wanted to start our own startup today. Maybe it's a tech startup, and we didn't possess these things. We didn't possess huge audiences. We didn't possess huge amounts of cash. But we had an idea, and ideas are cheap, right? But we had an idea. Maybe this is our side hustle. Like, what advice would you give to someone who's just getting started out, who maybe aspires to launch a tech product? Maybe, like, in other words, like adopting or adapting some of these principles of how you think about digital innovation, digital experimentation, launching, validation. Like, how would I bring those concepts down to someone who's really just getting going with this stuff?
Well, I mean, there's kind of two, or I should not even two. I mean, there's just like some thoughts that are coming to mind. It's like one fundamental question, like, okay, what if I want to be an entrepreneur, right? Like, I want to like try my own startup. nowadays you could go on to like Flippa and buy an existing mobile app. You could go on to Shopify Marketplace Exchange and buy an existing e-com company with existing customers and revenue. So I think there's faster paths to like being an entrepreneur, owning a business, or let's say, you know, in Flippa, there's an existing app with existing users that's similar to my idea. Can I adopt that and start to morph it in a sense, right? So I think that there's certainly like that path. If you're starting fresh, you have your own concept. You know, I think that you know, trying to, then you don't have a lot of money. You know, a lot of these tools, like these low code tools, are very, very cheap to stand up. So I think that there's like standing something up and starting to get qualitative. If you don't have the either, it's kind of two things: you either don't have the capital, or you don't have the confidence in where you want to put the capital yet. So I think it's about, how do I get to the right data points on either getting capital or getting confidence to deploy capital into things like ad spend. And so I think standing these tools up is easy. Like there's tools like Typeform that are really, you know, cheap and efficient. There's just like choosing like how you're going to go get quantifiable data points that build more confidence. So I think I mean, I don't know that I'm answering your question, but it's like two entrepreneurs that have an idea. What are the tools available to me to stand this idea up cheaply and quickly? Avoid the mom test, right? Like like I see so many people fall into like friends, families, or networks that aren't going to give you like the honest feedback, like the mom test of like, hey mom, how do I look? You know, like you've got to kind of avoid some of those traps. But really like centering on like getting true quant data that there's demand, the market, you know, obviously you've thought about the market size. And then there's asking yourself questions too. And like, you know, what is this? Is it a marketplace? Is this a platform? You know, I think looking at lookalike products is, one of my favorites is like scaling on like the giants who have raised hundreds of millions of dollars. So can I go identify patterns, lookalikes, and, you know, what do they say? Good artists create, great artists steal. You know, can I borrow mental models like that? I'm not having to think so much about how should we design this feature. Oh, well, this feature exists in, you know, 4 apps that have all raised over $300 million. Like that's how the feature should look. You know, I think the other thing to that is like we as users we like patterns, we like mental models. So you can't, obviously you got to like take it and make it your own, but you're also playing into like behaviors and comfortability of that users already have. So I think finding some of your like shortcuts, whereas like, do I go pay a designer 7 weeks? It's a little outrageous on a feature. Do I go pay a designer 2 weeks to go design this feature? Or can I have this feature designed in a day because Uber, DoorDash, Grubhub, Caviar, Chowbot, they all have this feature done and users are used to using it. And my product plays into this industry or, you know, expectation from a customer. So I think it's just like that's probably more like getting into just being an entrepreneur and like being scrappy. So I just kind of like go back to like the best ones are like growth hacking, right? Like you're just, you know, and constantly be reading, constantly be like, you know, studying. I think like a lot of entrepreneurs don't study as much because they get their idea and they just go in on it. And it's like, you've got to do that, but you've got to really, really study hard to be competitive. So I think those are all cheap or free wins right there on how to get out of the box, if you will.
Yeah, I always think about, you know, when you're just starting out, you really need to kind of niche down to, you know, who you think is really going to love what it is that you're building. I see a lot of entrepreneurs, they start building for themselves, right? Because if they can build something that solves their problem, you know, then go find other folks who have the same problem that they have, and all of a sudden you've got a small audience. Maybe I don't have the resources to spend validating which of these 10 audiences is going to generate the most demand for my product. I can't do that. So maybe I got to do more qual than I can quant in that situation.
That's a great point.
Cool. So we're getting a lot of good questions in here, and I'm trying to think of the best way I guess like maybe we've kind of like we've talked about no code and low code a lot during this chat. Like, let's look into the future for a moment. Like, what are you most excited about in the no code, low code space? And where do you see maybe white space or opportunity either for new low code or no code tools to enter the market, or like maybe I'm just getting I'm just getting my feet wet in the no code low code space. Like, where where would I go for, like, where's the highest value place for me to go sort of start playing around or attaching myself? There was like three questions in there, so however you
Yeah,
want to take
yeah.
that.
Yeah. So one like just free tip I'll give, because I use it all the time. Like there's a few different channels like this. There's a Lenny's newsletter. If you look it up, Lenny was a big product guy. Started his own newsletter that comes with a Slack channel. That community, and I don't even know Lenny, so I might be getting like a free plug here, which is great. But that community is insanely incredible for like, they have like a tool for no code, low code, like things. They have, a channel for talking Reforge. If you're familiar with Reforge, like that's like, if anyone can get into Reforge, you should go to Reforge. There's another plug, right? So there's how to get into that. So your question is like how to get into it, right? And then like, what were the first two parts of that? Like,
like what are you most excited about in the, like,
oh
so if
yes.
you were to look 5 years out, like where do you think no code, low code, or like what are you most excited here, I guess here's a way I would pose it. I would say, what are the biggest problems that you think no code, low code can solve in the next 5 years? That's probably a more fair question.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the biggest one, and selfishly, what am I most excited for is like the more adoption that happens on this, the more you can focus on actual growth work and innovation work versus having legacy tech and platforms. Every company, whether you're a year old and it compounds the older you are, has technical debt or legacy platforms that are so like ingrained in what they do that it, like just like the mental aspect of thinking about ripping something out, rebuilding it, customizing it. I have a client that to change like a line of code costs them $75,000. Like
Oh my God.
insane, right? And so selfishly, like the more low code, no code adoption progresses, the more it gets adopted. I think the more that the faster you can move on growth work, and the faster you can test I mean, so it's like the speed of growth. Just like I will predict like just like gets exponentially faster. And that'll be for all companies, right? Like Shopify is a great example. Like people used to have to build custom e-com sites, and it took months, and it was expensive. Now we could all go turn a Shopify site on today and start selling something. Like, and I think that also exists in the world of like third-party fulfillment. Like there's just so much stuff you can automate. Like, so that's a little bit outside of the no code, low code, but yeah, selfishly, that's what I'd be most excited about is like a world that has less legacy technologies and can move faster on growth. Would be exciting.
That's awesome. Since we're in the advice track, I'm going to ask for another like Reid's like words of wisdom. Let's say I'm a fledgling product builder. Maybe I'm just getting into product management or product innovation. Maybe I want to go work at a Draftbit, or I want to go work at a Vokal. Like I want to go, do some hot shit stuff in the product building world. What are Reid's words of wisdom for people who want to launch amazing digital products and experiences? Shortcuts. Are there any shortcuts? What separates a good product builder from an A+ product builder?
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny because I was gonna say I'm usually never one to give advice. I usually like to share experience, but this question is one that I actually like perhaps have some actual advice that I would say. I would encourage everybody who wants to get into product, break into a company like Draftbit, to go buy an app on Flippa or the Shopify Marketplace Exchange. There's a handful of others. Go buy one, and it's like, can you walk the walk kind of thing, right? Start, even if it's just the intention to like train and practice, right? So the goal might not be to like really like increase sales on a Shopify e-com site that you purchased. It's like, I want to work on growth work, right? I want to do growth work, right? So I think like you're investing in yourself in that way. You are actually like demonstrating to yourself and whatever company you'd want to go work with that you took the initiative to learn this stuff. You will be hacking by virtue of like just like trying some of the growth work. And you think about it, it's like, what's my acquisition work, activation work, engagement, re-engagement, retention, like monetization, like hit the core pillars. Play with a bunch of different tools. Like, what happens if I use Braze versus Iterable? What happens if I use Firebase versus Optimizely? Set up different funnels of your analytics and so, and then run a bunch of experiments, right? I mean, that would be certainly the advice on that side, is to kind of do that work, right? And then the other thing I would say that is pretty good, and we incorporate into our training, there's a site called gopractice.io. I'm sure everyone on this is familiar with Sean Ellis. He was the creator of it. It's a really sweet like simulator for growth. So it's like Sims for growth work. And so that would be another thing that I think we love it here. It even takes you through like some Amplitude. It gives you some logins for Amplitude and like takes you through like some scenarios. So that would be, those two things alone, I think, would allow you to easily break in and or grow your skill set if you're already in the industry and just you want to get better.
I love that. All right, so since we just have a couple of minutes left here, I'm just going to scroll back to the chat real quick and see if there are any questions we didn't really cover.
Sure. Yeah.
Our buddy at Yoast at Flex Money is asking, he wants to know what the basis is for that $75,000 for changing a line of code. He wants to, you might be building a business case for no code. I'm not really sure, but how did you determine it costs $75,000 to change one line of code?
Yeah, it's just this business has grown so much through acquisition. They have 6 different business units that all leverage the same back end. And so like, I mean, if you have never been inside a multi-billion-dollar company that operates across several business units and a shared code base that supports the whole thing, like then me saying this out loud to you would be mind numbing. In my world, it's probably, I don't know that I'd go as far as the norm, but it's certainly not an outlier. I mean, there are companies that have over 200 engineers to support an app that does kind of one function and has a low user base. Like it's like nothing. If I could walk you through a week of my life, a month of my life, and you have not worked inside of these companies, your mind, like Joe, who just walked behind me, he led product and growth at Reverb. It's like, when I was bringing him to Vokal, I was telling him these stories and he believed in them, but like, then you get on the other side of him, you're like, holy shit. And that's where like the opportunity for Vokal and the passion is like, we talk about saving nostalgia and partnering with the brands and businesses we grew up with to fight harder and punch back in the digital economy. So for us, it's like, we're it's hard for me to explain what drives that, but you just have to understand, I guess, like the architecture and what these businesses are and how they got there, and then it would never surprise you.
Yeah, I came from an enterprise background where I was selling non-technology projects to organizations, and I will just leave it at this. There are entire groups within these enterprises called change management. And if you don't know what a change management person does, that probably is a good thing. That means you have never had to suffer through trying to get a change into a Fortune 100 company. It's people's entire jobs to make these minute changes in businesses. So yeah, huge opportunity in that space. and hopefully low code, no code can be a part of it. And that feels like a pretty good way to wrap up. So I want to give a hearty thanks to Reid for joining us for this last hour on this live stream. I learned a ton, and it was a super fun conversation for me to be a part of. Everyone, thanks. Please drop your thanks for Reid into the chat so we can end with some virtual applause here. So thank you, Reid. Reid, do you have any pitch or anything that you want to leave folks with as it relates to yourself, to Vokal, to the digital economy, anything like that? Anything you want to ask or leave folks with?
No, so my, I guess, selfish plug is like, if you want to do growth work or you're really into product and you want to work at a badass company that's growing, feel free to shoot me a note. But otherwise, no, I had a ton of fun on this. I just got to spend an hour talking about, my second passion in my family. So I appreciate everyone that joined in, the questions, and Nick for being a great host.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Reid. And yeah, we'll catch you soon.
Awesome. Have a good long weekend. Thanks, everybody.